Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a Gameweek 24 draft wildcard as we look ahead towards double Gameweek 25, but actually a fixture opportunity here in Gameweek 24 where I think you can actually start to build up 2 free transfers for Gameweek 26. The reason why I would suggest actually wildcarding on Gameweek 24 as opposed to Gameweek 25 is because let's say you go for triple City, let's say you go for triple Liverpool, maybe you even include a couple of Luton players. What you probably need though is to understand that they blank in Gameweek 26, and actually it would be better if you have 2 free transfers for them so that you could just simply take out 2 of your Liverpool players or maybe one of your Liverpool plus one of your Luton players going towards, let's say, Gameweek 26, and that would allow you to field a full strength team on Gameweek 26 instead. The wildcard draft that I'll suggest is based on a limited budget. So I've done this based on imagining that you actually have 1.1 sell value within your team, as opposed to some other managers right now who probably have a lot more money in the bank. If you do have more money in the bank, obviously there's going to be some reasonable upgrades that I'll suggest along the way. So do listen to the video for sort of potential upgrades and suggestions there. In terms of keepers, what I would go with here is a combination between Ariel and Kaminsky. And why I'm suggesting Kaminsky is because not only does he have a potential double game week on 25, which is actually confirmed, obviously, he's got a potential double game week on game week 28, right? He could have a Luton double game week fixture. There could even be another Luton double game week as well. And so that's why Kaminsky, I think, in general, if you think about this being your second wild card, they actually have a lot more fixtures to play than most of the other teams in the league. And that's obviously going to be a huge benefit when you own a keeper like that, because you don't really have to waste time thinking about having a keeper as a transfer, and really Kaminsky will just end up becoming your substitute keeper most of the time. Ariel, of course, is going to be the keeper suggested. You can obviously upgrade here as well. Part of that, of course, is the option to go into someone like Flecken, which I wouldn't recommend because obviously you're just doubling up on the same double. You have other opportunities, of course, in simply going to someone like Neto as well. But I still would prefer, for example, just a cheap, simple goalkeeper duo of Areola plus Kaminsky. If you want to actually upgrade, you could obviously think about going for Raya as well. Now, for Gameweek 24, what's interesting is that Liverpool, of course, have one of the best fixtures. So I do think that at defense, you probably want to have one Liverpool player. And part of this, too, is actually if you look at, let's say, Gameweek 25 and Gameweek 24, those two Luton at home and Burnley fixtures are very, very good for a set-piece taker as well. So Virgil van Dijk is someone that I would be suggesting. In my opinion, you can always stretch this budget to go towards Trent, right? You can simply just go towards someone like Trent, who's probably going to be a little bit higher ceiling, but we also have a doubt on his minutes right now. I think that's totally fair. Part of this is because Liverpool also have some cup games to play, and Trent is also coming back from injury. So his level of fitness right now is not immediately as high as was at the start of the season, when it actually seemed like he was looking very good coming back from the preseason. And so as a result of that, I do think that Liverpool will probably see, Virgil van Dijk playing more games over this double game week compared to someone like Trent. So I'm not really fully confident that Trent is the upgrade that you absolutely need to go for. In terms of actually creating a stable sort of defensive backbone for the rest of the period, I think Gabriel is needed. And part of this video will also sort of outline why I think it's necessary that we actually have 5 at the back, right? When you think about, let's say, blank game week 26 and also double game week 25, one of the issues, as I said, is simply a lot of the double game week players will actually just blank on the next week. And actually, if you're going for someone like Doughty, for example, you need players who will just consistently play over this period without blanks. Yes, of course, there could be a chance that after I record this video that maybe Aston Villa or Chelsea will have an FA Cup result upset. But I do think that the biggest impact here is that actually an Arsenal defender is perfectly valid. And Gabriel still, in my opinion, is the most efficient defender in the game, even including some defenders who have some doubles in the short term. So for me, I would always get Gabriel within my draft structure. Doughty and Virgil are your sort of double game week players who I think are great. And of course, Doughty, the best thing here is that he could have potential future double game weeks as well in the short term before, for example, larger double game weeks like 34 or 37. The fourth defender here is actually an Aston Villa defender. And the role of the Aston Villa defender is simply to just be present on Game Week 26. Right now, I'm actually going to suggest Diego Carlos because with the Konsa injury, I think that he's probably going to be the most nailed player in the short term for Aston Villa. But I think that you can upgrade, of course, to someone like Moreno. Moreno has a little bit of downside to him, though, because, of course, Luka Dean will come back and he will probably take minutes away from Moreno, but Moreno's been playing brilliantly. So it's hard to actually see Moreno actually missing out for Game Week 26, which is actually the crucial fixture where you really need an Aston Villa defender. Just because, for example, if I'm looking at Gabriel in this team, Gabriel unfortunately doesn't have a good game. You could obviously think about going for Matty Cash as well. He's just dropped in price to 4.6 million. My issue with Matty Cash, though, is that he hasn't really been playing well this season. And part of that is going to have an influence on, let's say, whether he's actually going to get consistent minutes. Because even though Collins is out for 3 to 4 weeks. If let's say you look at Moreno as a short-term punt as well compared to cash, I'd rather go with Moreno as that sort of short-term punt, because we always know that there's structures in play that Aston Villa can sort of incorporate, where cash can get subbed off at 70 minutes if he's not starting all the games and playing 90. As far as the fifth defender, I would go with Walker here. I think we've seen enough over the course of the season that we can recommend Walker as a top pick as a Man City defender. But at the same time, I also think that you have an option here to simply go for Guardiola. Guardiola is someone who seemingly is more important now in the Man City structure. But it also depends on whether, Pep is actually going to be confident in, let's say, keeping the sort of structure that we saw in place versus Brentford. He is almost an extremely advanced left winger right now in the structure. And that was sort of what allowed Foden to play central. So I think that given that the result versus Brentford was very good, given that that was a very tough away fixture and City actually came off looking extremely good, maybe it's the case that Guardiola is a little bit more interesting than Walker. But I think that also Walker has that sort of historical precedent where maybe in different formations, we can see Walker actually play more frequently as he has basically over the course of the season. And with Guardiola, maybe it's a bit of temporal thing. Although right now, I think this is a very good time to invest into either. As far as the midfield, we'll be going with Saka, Son, Foden, Hee-chan, and Garnacho. Now, because Son is actually back in the game and because he's come back early from the Asian Cup, and the same thing applies to Hee-chan, I think it does make sense to move into Son and Hee-chan. For me, even though Richarlison is playing in the form of his life, one of my concerns with Richarlison really is that whether he's going to get consistent minutes basically beyond Gameweek 24. I think Gameweek 24 is quite good. In fact, you might even see Gameweek 24 as an opportunity for Son to get benched, at which point probably you might not want to actually wildcard into Son. You might think about Son as a future transfer, and you could instead, for example, go here for someone like Richarlison and maybe save up your money to actually upgrade someone else within this draft, potentially even Foden to KDB. So that's an option. Now, you could also just completely replace Son with KDB, and you could replace Walker with, let's say, someone like Udogie. But the issue is that structurally, you do kind of want Walker to fill in the gaps for your team in Gameweek 26 when you need a defender. Now, it really just depends on what you actually feel. If you actually think that it makes more sense for you to actually go for KDB and you want to maximize on the triple city attack because KDB's minutes look so good, I think that's perfectly fine as well. But I still think that ultimately, if you, let's say, forget Gameweek 26 for a second, Son is an amazing pick because Tottenham actually have some immediate short-term fixtures that are brilliant. And I still think that Son's going to be the penalty taker for this Tottenham team. So when we build a wild card, usually what we want to do is actually make sure that we prevent as many future transfers as possible. So if there's ever an opportunity where you're actually planning to go from KDB to Son later down the line, I think it makes sense to actually go for Son immediately. But once again, it comes down to your confidence in terms of his minutes for Gameweek 24. What I like about this team too, though, is that you can still bench Son theoretically here because we've got 8 attackers in this draft, and it's totally fine to bench Son on this week when you have other players who are even at the cheap price ranges who have really good fixtures. So Saka for me is one of those players who I just really feel like it is almost impossible to build an FPL team without him. I just think he's very, very consistent. He has 90 minutes per game. He's probably on penalties. There's just nothing really wrong with Saka as a pick, and I really wouldn't recommend people to go without him. As far as Foden, for me, yes, he's obviously going to be a worse pick than KDB, but you can see a week like, for example, in the Brentford fixture, it is scary what Foden can do centrally and on the inside. And so I just think that if you were, let's say, to create a well-rounded team, yes, of course, if I was to maximize on a free hit with City, I would probably have KDB in this draft. But I think Foden is someone who actually has guaranteed minutes right now at this point in time of his career with Pep Guardiola at Man City. And that's more than good enough of a reason to actually go for Foden and to allow you to create a more well-rounded and balanced team. With Hee-chan, we're going to actually look at a player here who covers you perfectly for Gameweek 26, but also just simply is at an incredible budget. So he's also going to be a good player for Gameweek 24, and ultimately probably going to be a penalty taker for Wolves. The question mark, of course, is going to be who actually is the true penalty taker, because the last time we saw a penalty when Hee-chan and Cunha was on the pitch, it was Hee-chan taking, but he did draw the penalty. Of course, in the Chelsea game, we saw Cunha draw the penalty and he took the penalty. So personally, that makes me think that Neto is not part of the discussion in terms of penalties, but you could subscribe to the argument that penalties are split between all three of them and that whoever draws the penalty will take the penalty. Personally, I like to sort of look at historical preference. I think Hwang, as the penalty taker in a situation where he drew the penalty and Cunha was on the pitch, leads him to being sort of the permanent penalty taker for the time being. So I think Hee-chan is still an amazing pick in the midfield. And Garnacho, for me, still is at a ridiculous price point and still just basically a budget steal for the rest of the season. What Garnacho provides to you is someone who's going to be a 90-minute player, plays more minutes than Rashford right now, and effectively just gives you the value of a Man United attacker for what seems like a slightly rejuvenated team, at least from the attacking point of view, for an extraordinary price. And this allows you, of course, to sort of create an extremely well-rounded team and spend as much money as possible within the forward line. In terms of the attacking forwards, I've actually gone with Haaland, Darwin, and Watkins. Part of the reason why I haven't gone for Jota and I've gone for Darwin instead is because I think that, let's say if Salah's to come back, I think that there's more of a chance that Jota loses out minutes compared to someone like Darwin, who I think will actually take more minutes. And part of that, of course, is pricing in, for example, the benching versus Arsenal. If you think about it, Liverpool have to rotate with this team. Sometimes because of the preference of Klopp from a tactical point of view, and sometimes from the preference of just managing players, having 5 to 6 attackers on the bench, and actually ensuring that they all get game time, which is something that Klopp has always been able to manage to do. Salah, of course, is someone who gets permanent minutes, but I think the issue and why Salah's not in this draft is because the fitness thing is a serious thing, and Liverpool are a club that do treat injuries seriously. So I think when you're thinking about Salah coming back, unless he, for example, features versus Burnley, I still think it's such a risk to go with Salah right now as a draft pick because he's going to swallow up a lot of your budget. He's not nearly as close to full fitness as someone like Haaland or even KDB is. And it doesn't make sense for me to go for Salah because I probably wouldn't recommend triple captaining Salah on Gameweek 25 because, as I said, I do not think he's going to get the minutes that we want coming back from an injury. And so that's why we're probably going to prefer going with Haaland, Darwin, and Watkins here because I think you're guaranteeing more minutes. I would still actually suggest that Darwin's probably going to be a better pick just for the sort of landscape of the next two fixtures, right? What you have to look at between Jota and Darwin is to ask yourself the question of, does it actually make more sense to own Darwin or Jota right now and then actually transfer them out in Gameweek 26? And who would you actually like to have for 2 weeks? Because, as I said, there's a chance that Jota could lose out more minutes over the next 2 weeks compared to Darwin. I would actually recommend Darwin for that reason. If, let's say, Salah was completely injured and there's no chance that he's going to feature at all in Gameweek 25, I'd probably change my opinion here, and I'd probably suggest actually that you go for Jota in the midfield instead. But right now, I think the minutes actually still sit with Darwin. And of course, I know a lot of people think about Jota versus Darwin and the difference in terms of the finishing right now, and that's totally fair as a point. But part of me still thinks that you want to guarantee minutes, and Darwin for me still guarantees minutes, and it's not like he's been a joke recently. His finishing has still been good, hit the woodwork a lot, but we still know that there's an amazing player there, and I would still back Darwin as a pick. Part of me thinks also that I'm going to be simply looking for a Gameweek 26 transfer to someone like Solanke, and that's such an easy move to make from Darwin, as opposed to, let's say, Jota on Gameweek 26, where I don't actually know necessarily what midfielder I would actually recommend going for in Gameweek 26. So that's actually the interesting sort of thing. I think right now you've got more forwards that are easily replaceable because they're all so good compared to, let's say, in the midfield, where I don't think that there's necessarily a perfect replacement for Jota in 2 weeks' time when he blanks. So that's actually part of the sort of squad building argument for going for Darwin. And then the last pick is actually going to be Watkins. So a lot of people will think about, why not Tony in this draft? And for me, I've thought about Watkins and I've talked about Watkins versus Tony quite a bit. I still think that Watkins ultimately, even though he's one fixture down on Tony, actually just has a general better run when it comes to fixtures. And when we look at projected points as well, with models, with goal scoring odds as well from gambling sites, Watkins just simply has better fixtures. Even if we look at just a pure analytics point of view, looking at the teams that they're facing, Tony is facing a lot of top half defenses, whereas Watkins literally has a run of games where the next 7 games are still bottom half defenses in terms of expected goals conceded. That is incredible, and for me, I would prefer Watkins over Tony, and that's why I would suggest Watkins over Tony within this draft structure. So that's kind of my suggestion right now. This is going to be the wildcard draft that I would recommend Gameweek 24. This is, of course, hamstringed by budget. If you can upgrade, I do think that you have an opportunity here to maybe consider tripling up on City. Son maybe doesn't need to be in this draft. You could actually go for KDB. You could also replace Walker with someone else and maybe skip, let's say, a Spurs player altogether. This could actually allow you maybe to go for, maybe another Arsenal defender. Potentially also look at someone else from Brighton, potentially, like someone like Van Heck, if you actually want to save even more budget in that sort of Walker position. But I would still actually go with this draft because I think it's well-rounded, and I do think it also gets you all the players you sort of want with a very, very strong 8-forward structure that allows you to rotate well, because players like Hee-Chan and Garnacho are just at incredible price points where I think you can totally bench them each week, And that's totally fine for the structure of your team. You don't have to kill your team, or you don't have to see let's say 15, 20 million budget on your bench each week. And I think that's totally fine in FPL, that we have rotation. This is what happens during the double game week and blank game week period. You just need a strong, well-rounded team. And I think this is one. And that's going to be it for the video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.